Hello, in just a moment, the press preview as we take a look at the morning papers. First, though, a reminder of our top stories here this evening. Jeremy Corbyn says Labour is in good heart despite losing a safe seat held by the party for more than 80 years to the Tories. The Sky News team has been at the front line of Iraqi forces' push into western Mosul as the battle against Islamic State in the city enters its most dangerous phase. And Donald Trump has stepped up his attacks on what he calls fake news. He also told Conservative activists that the Mexico border wall would be built ahead of schedule. Hello there, you're watching Sky News and the press preview. Over the next half hour, we'll be seeing what's making the headlines with the director of the Institute of Ideas, Claire Fox, and the editor of The New European, Matt Kelly. So a very good evening to both of you.
Hi.
So let's take a look at what's on those front pages then. And the Eye leads with the fallout from the Copeland by-election and renewed questions over Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party. The Times quotes former Foreign Secretary David Miliband, who says that Labour is in its weakest position for 50 years. The Telegraph focuses on Theresa May's attempts to brand the Conservatives the party of working people. The FT's Weekend Edition reports that the government wants to plug a hole in public finances by curbing payments to people with disabilities and health problems. The Guardian says that air pollution levels are now above the legal limit at 1 in 4 London schools. The Mail quotes the Transport Secretary Chris Grayling asking motorists to think about air pollution before they buy a diesel vehicle. The Express once again has damning words about EU migration, this time saying it's a threat to pensions. And the Mirror reports that Whirlpool is being accused of delaying compensation payments to customers forced out of their homes by appliance fires. So let's chat through some of those papers and some of the stories inside as well with Claire Fox and Matt Kelly. And in fact, you have gone inside to kick us off, and a double-page spread in the Times which covers pretty much every aspect, on the face of it at least, of the fallout from the by-elections yesterday. So which aspect of it did you want to start with?
I think for me, one of the key pieces is this: Labour Party blames anyone but Corbyn for what's just transpired. And I think this is unfortunately typical of the state of delusion that the clique around Jeremy Corbyn exists in. They're blaming Tony Blair, John McDonnell, who I've got a lot of time for, I think is very good, outspoken, sincere man, but putting the blame onto Tony Blair's speech earlier this week about Brexit and representative democracy and all of this, and saying that, you know, can Tony please shut up, please, because he's done us great damage. Well, I'm sorry. The Labour Party is in its weakest position for decades, and also poor old Jeremy Corbyn couldn't really have picked a worse constituency to have this battleground, because he's been campaigning for years to shut down the very industry that these constituents depend on, nuclear industry. So tough luck, mate. You know, chickens have come home to roost, I'm afraid.
Well, yes, and this is a bad result, no question about it, for Jeremy Corbyn in Copeland, given the fact that it is very rare for the government to gain a seat while in government like this in a by-election. How serious, though, is it, do you think, for Jeremy Corbyn?
I don't know that it will touch Jeremy Corbyn whatsoever, because I think the crisis at the heart of the Labour Party is much more profound than that. And the truth of the matter is that people might want to blame, I mean, you can sort of say the party blames anyone but Corbyn, but, you know, actually, if you blame Corbyn, it doesn't get you very far either, because you get what are you putting in his place, or what are the political policies being posed as an alternative to Corbyn. I thought it was kind of fascinating that, you know, just to use an example of here, you know, although we campaigned very hard, says John McDonnell, over the NHS and gave assurances about nuclear issues, the misinformation put out by the Conservatives meant we weren't able to persuade people. And it's sort of like, you know, the Conservatives weren't fair in this election. Yeah. They said horrible things about us, and we were telling everyone nicely. I mean, you just think, you know, they failed to inspire people with a vision or with any kind of political programme. And it's that inability to genuinely talk about the political crisis that Labour's in and to blame the Tories, which is just a bit... I mean, you know, the Tories persuaded people more than we did. It's their fault. What do they expect? They're the political opponents. That's the deal of an election.
And for me, the really interesting question is, does Corbyn actually care that much? Does he care he's lost this by-election? Is he much more interested in the reformation of the Labour Party into a much far-left organisation? And the truth is, he's not that bothered whether he wins power or not. Now, if that's
but maybe
the case,
he wants power, but it might take a bit longer if he is pushing for a big change, a big movement.
That's the thing is, I think that there is, but you know, I think there is a genuine belief, which I don't want to I don't want to discount a kind of at least within their own terms of it being virtuous. There are Labour Party activists, you know, momentum activists and so on, who believe grasping hold of the power of the Labour Party will, in the long run, lead to, you know, kind of the delivery of working people, and we've now got the Labour Party. The thing is that it feels delusional to me. Yeah. And the main thing at the moment is, and by the way, we do have to mention Brexit in this, something very profound has happened in this country. Politics has got serious. It's very... you know, huge vote, Brexit, representing not just whether we stay in the EU or not, but a bloody nose to the establishment, at the very least a kind of rejection of mainstream politics. There's a lot to discuss and talk about. So, you know, it just feels to me that the Labour Party are not up to the task. And it also, by the way, UKIP aren't either.
Well, that's right. And UKIP backer piles pressure on Nuttall. Paul Nuttall obviously didn't win that seat. So he is struggling in Stoke, that was.
Look, who knows what UKIP stand for anymore? I don't think Paul Nuttall knows what UKIP stands for. He's trying to push them more towards the mainstream. The truth is, for him, is that the Tories have come his way. They've edged further to the right, and he's in danger of being completely isolated and irrelevant. I think he already is.
And also, by the way, we can't forget that the Tories treated the people of Stoke with utter contempt. I mean, they didn't take they actually got a lot of votes, but they didn't take that by-election seriously. They didn't put forward a serious candidate in the same way. And the reason I'm saying that is because if you're in Stoke, you're basically just disenfranchised in that election. That's why hardly anyone voted.
Claire, the Tories have been running Stoke down for 20 years. You know, I mean, Thatcher's government decimated industry in Stoke.
Ironically, though, they could have got a few more votes if they'd tried.
Theresa May, of course, celebrating, riding high, and there she is. They're hailing that victory. They're in Copeland, and they're on the front of the Telegraph now claiming that they're the Workers' Party. But we should crack on with other stories, otherwise we won't be able to talk about anything else. So, because this does throw up so many different issues. I'm quite happy to have a dig at Theresa May, if you like. But I think she's delusional as well. You know, she thinks they're the Workers' Party. That's even more laughable than stuff Corbyn's coming out with these days. OK. Let's move on to the Express. That was the next story you wanted to talk about. UK faces new pension crisis. What's at the root of this, according to the Express? Well, I mean, only the Daily Express could manage to conflate the very real pension crisis that we are about to experience in the UK and mass EU migration. You know, I mean, it is... you don't know whether to laugh or cry sometimes when you see this stuff. They are two totally separate issues, but the Express is saying that EU migration has been an economic catastrophe. It says they're costing £30 billion a year, and then it says we're subsidising low-paid EU workers, and this is going to have a knock-on effect to all of our pension pots. Pensions is a massive catastrophe waiting for us to come, which some government is going to have to deal with. The truth is we cannot afford the ageing and wealthier communities that we're getting. It's got nothing to do with EU migration. I think that the reason why I was keen that we kind of raise this story as well is that, you know, as somebody who's actually argued for Brexit, aware and have said we've got to be able to talk about taking control of borders and at least recognise that immigration has caused some concern in this country and controlling immigration and so on. And all of this is the kind of story that destroys it all, because immediately people sort of go, oh, you're just the kind of person who's going to blame EU immigrants on everything like the pensions crisis, Claire. And guess what? There are people who actually do play that crass game, and I just don't think it's helpful. But, you know, it's the front page. We know it's got a certain popularity. I would like to say, though, that that's not the reason why most people have qualms about EU immigration. It's not that they scapegoat migrants for immigrants. Okay. Quite rightly, because it's a fact that EU migration is a net
benefit to the UK.
And that wasn't what the concerns were anyway, an economic one.
They're quoting a report by what they how they describe a leading
set of experts.
Yes, exactly. Anyway, let's move on to the Telegraph, because they've got a European story. Netherlands, they say, are holding an inquiry as to whether they should ditch the euro.
I mean, an extraordinary story in as much as I think that the big story at the moment in Europe is that the EU are having serious problems. There's huge amounts of Euroscepticism on the rise in different countries. What's important here is that it's the Netherlands and their government were having an inquiry about whether they can leave the EU, because they're thinking maybe we can diffuse the Euroscepticism by getting, maybe having a referendum on whether to leave the euro, and that might kind of mean we can, and so on and so forth. But there is a popular revulsion against the EU bureaucracy. There is a recognition of the fact that the euro itself has impoverished millions of people, whether it's in Greece, it's an unstable currency and so on. And I'm glad to see that things are being stirred up a bit. Sadly, of course, this will be exploited by the likes of Geert Wilders, who obviously is operating in that sphere in Dutch politics. But I also know that there's a lot of people involved in Dutch politics on the left, radicals, who are also very hostile to the EU and its impositions.
I think there's a very interesting phenomenon here that's happening, whether or not the very far right wins, the rest of our politics is reacting to this. Now, you see it in France, you're going to see it in France, however Marine Le Pen does. You're seeing it here with Geert Wilders, the far right Dutch politician. People are now reacting to this popular movement. I think we're seeing it in the UK as well. I think you're seeing the Tory party visibly moving to the right. It concerns me deeply. OK, we're going to pause there. We've got lots more to talk about after the break, and no one's going anywhere, including you. Coming up, the Theresa May effect, how the Prime Minister inspired a mum of 4 to sign up to the Tories. That's coming up. Welcome back to the press preview, where we're taking a look at the papers tonight with the director of the Institute of Ideas, Claire Fox, and the editor of the New European, Matt Kelly. And to kick off this section, you've picked out a story from the Mail tomorrow, and this is this mum of 4 inspired by May. Who is this mum of 4?
Well, I wanted to do this story because, apart from the fact that, I'm certainly not a Tory as it happens, but I think there's an awful lot of nonsense talked about how we can involve women in politics and schemes to involve them and all the rest of it. And it seems to me that this is actually quite an inspiring story of a woman who kind of got involved in politics, got her young daughters involved in politics. I mean, talk about girls' power, and partly inspired by a female Prime Minister, without there being box-ticking and positive discrimination schemes and all the rest of it. Just in terms of who it is, but I think this is interesting in terms of Theresa May's claim to be the Workers' Party overstating it. But nonetheless, this new MP, her husband is a welder at Sellafield.
She's new MP as in just won the by-election.
Just won the by-election, sorry. Just won the by-election. She's a community activist. She did a foundation degree at a local university late in life, part of the lifelong learning revolution. And they're very much part of the community. I mention this because there was quite a lot of outrage at her winning, and it was, selfish middle classes betraying the working classes again. And you think it's not so it's not so simplistic anymore. This is not like the rich posh Tories attacking the workers. And then there's this sort of idea that the Labour supporters are all kind of poor and impoverished, and that because her husband works at the nuclear plant and that they own their own house, that they must be rich and posh. And I think that chippy prejudice really is a destructive influence on politics, and we shouldn't endorse it.
I haven't got an awful lot to add. I'm not a Tory either, but you look at Trudy Harrison there and her kids and you think, great, and she's from the community, as Claire said. She's put a lot of effort into the community. I wish all MPs were like that, and wish we had fewer professional politicians and more people who are actually in touch with their neighbours and the communities and the things that really matter to people.
OK, let's move on to this story in the Mail. Now publish minorities' top grades is their headline there. So what's that about?
Well, I think it's the very opposite of what we've just been talking about, which is that universities are now going to be under pressure to go down the identity politics line even more, and to, instead of congratulating people regardless of their social background, their ethnicity, their gender or so on, they're for achieving a degree and working hard and so on, immediately they're going to say, oh look, we're going to boast to you that this person's got a degree and they're from a working class background and they're from a BME community and they're from a... And the whole thing is the opposite of meritocratic. It only sees people through their identity. It doesn't take them seriously as people who've transcended their identity. And so, you know, we've just seen a woman who's got there of her own volition.
Yeah.
But is it important in terms of making sure that there aren't certain areas of society that are missing out and aren't progressing at the same way as others?
Yeah, maybe. Well, the only thing I was going to add to that is that I find it astonishing now the pressure kids feel to go to university. It was never the case when I was a kid. You know, university was a thing you aspired to, and if you didn't get there, there was no disgrace in that or sense of failure. I'm concerned now that there is this idea that if you haven't gone to university, you've somehow failed, you've fallen short. And I was amazed, I mean, ignorant on my part, but I didn't realise that, for instance, to be a nurse in the NHS, you needed to get a university degree. You think about all the people who would feel the vocation of nursing and were disbarred from that profession because they didn't have a university degree. Seems ridiculous to me. So I think now employers are constantly saying, have you got a degree? Have you got a degree? And in many cases, it's not relevant to your skill set or your future opportunities. We need to get over this kind of academic prejudice and let people be good at what they want to do and not be obsessed with bits of paper.
And by the way, when they do get their bits of paper, you want to see that it's based on them getting hard work and not that we tick the box. I mean, I think that's my problem. It's patronising. Do you know what I mean? Oh, working class woman gets degree, box ticked, and then they boast about it. No, a student got a degree. And I get very nervous when people only see people through the prism of their backgrounds. You can see what corrosive impact this could have.
OK, let's finally, see how much time we've got. Oh, 30 seconds, I'm told. It's definitely finally. This is Inside the Times. It's a story that you've picked out about a recent court case?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in a nutshell, 18-stone jazz fan, a few too many drinks, falls down a flight of stairs, breaks her elbow. First thought that comes into her head is, how much is this worth? Goes to a lawyer, starts looking for compensation, and I just think there is an element now in our society where you think anything bad happens to you, it must be worth a few quid.
And the reason you mentioned her weight and what she was wearing was
the
mentioned by the
judge
judge saying...
Well, you were drunk, Alice, in fact, but the point was that this person said, you know, it was rather dark at Ronnie Scott's.
Yeah. And she was wearing...
I don't want the solution to be they turn the light on at Ronnie Scott's, right? And it's the kind of risk-free, you know, if you fall over, blame someone else. And I just think, although it might, it's a kind of funny headline, some people might say it's insulting by the judge who said this. I think the judge had a point to just sort of say, take more care, don't get drunk. If you're going to wear those heels, watch where you're going.
3-inch platform heels, yeah.
OK, that's advice for all of us this weekend anyway. Well, Claire Fox and Matt Kelly, good to see you both. Thanks very much indeed.